All right. Well, I don't know. Maybe this is all we're getting today. Maybe everyone else is actually busy. So I guess I'll get started. Let's see. Kifu has a PR this week for CBT. They have been working on uh, some really neat testing infrastructure to be able to uh, run PRs through tests and then look at whether or not the results have changed and then mark them as pass or fail. And so in this case, we were seeing a lot of failures because of just random variance in test results. So this is just a quick PR that changes that variance to be bigger, so that, or not the variance to be bigger, but the requirement for the variance so that there are fewer false positives in the testing. Um, and that was the only new PR I noticed, but it's possible there's something else I missed. There were two that closed that I saw. One is to use full stripe width for padding appends for CLS Journal. I think Jason reviewed that. Um, and then also there was another one that merged, the Kifu had merged, that removes the data buff mempool from NVMe device. And apparently that's a performance improvement. I don't actually understand why, but you could take a look if you're interested in that. A number that were updated this week. Um, let's see, more discussion on BlueStorm min alloc size set to 4K. There's some questions on what to do about testing the new AVL allocator, or sorry, hybrid allocator rather. And so the thought was to maybe randomly switch allocators and then run them through tests, although that's going to be deferred until later. We can figure out how we want to test it at that point later on, but just get it merged for now. Let's see, my PR for pre-splitting MDS directories into multiple dir frags that was updated. I got some feedback that folks weren't happy about how much the 12 bytes that were being added to inode T, and so I can shrink that down to 1 byte, but we lose a little bit of functionality now that you can no longer actually read back the expected files xadder that you set as a user, which it's kind of unfortunate, but it does let us shrink down the addition to the inode down to just a single byte. Alternately, we could also just store the expected files in 4 bytes in the inode and then calculate the bits on the fly. There might be some more CPU overhead possibly, but that could be done as well. So a couple of different options here for how to do this depending on what people care about. But it does seem to be working and providing some benefit at least. Let's see. Maji and Peng's PR, we can discuss that a little bit lower, but he did some really good investigation work. So the gist of it is that we can improve performance without actually changing, reducing the number of threads or changing, or sorry, shards, changing the number of shards and threads. There's a simple fix that kind of fixes the bad behavior. Let's see, Adam's RocksDB sharding PR, I think, got updated. I don't remember what. I think, Josh, you were reviewing that. Was there new stuff this week?
Sorry, which one?
Adam's
General iterator.
Hey, Adam. Sorry, I didn't see you there. What was that?
I updated with adding of whole space iterator that merges all possible columns into one listing. It's basically not used in Ceph, but it's necessary at least for some tools just to list all keys, like say a KV store tool needs that.
Sure. Okay, cool. Let's see, and then Adam Emerson, his objection triumphant, I think got a couple of more updates. Not quite sure what the status is though. All right. The couple that we didn't see any movement on this week, nothing that really sticks out though. Yeah, nothing huge there. All right, so Ma Jianping's PR. So this is exciting. Basically, there was just a one-line fix that in his testing dramatically improved the read-write performance with our current default settings. From I remember I think it was like almost like a 30% improvement by just waking up, doing a notify a multiple notify instead of notify one in the in-queue front in the sharded.port queue. So very exciting there. That's really nice. So we should
Yeah, that
probably
was great.
backport
That
that.
you were able to root cause it so fast and figure out exactly what was the problem. It's nice to see that the
Yeah,
numbers line up exactly after that patch.
yeah, exactly. That's
8.2 versus 16 in one thread.
Yeah, exactly. So that's really nice. So no more having to decide to rearrange things and the benefits and drawbacks. Now we can still have our current defaults and we just get free performance, which is great.
Yeah, no, and like you said, backport to whatever releases that the original patch was included in.
Yep, yep. Um, we might we might even for Nautilus, if it's not there, we might even want to just consider backporting his that original change plus this,
Yeah, possibly.
if that makes sense.
I'm not sure how big his original change was. I think it was part of a bigger series, maybe. Forget.
Oh, okay. Yeah, the specific commit was small. It wasn't,
Yeah,
it
yeah.
was not really bad, but yeah, anyway. Um so that looks really good. That was a really nice simple win. Okay, and then I already kind of mentioned my MBS stuff. The only other thing I maybe would mention here is that my hope is that if this ends up being something that we decide that we want to do, it could also then lead to being able to pre-export in addition to pre-splitting directory fragments for a directory that is expected to be really hot. Um, but we'll see what happens if I try that and if it looks like it's even worthwhile or not. So yeah, that's basically all I've got. Um, it doesn't look like Igor's here today, so maybe no updates on his stuff. I suppose the other thing that's not on here is the uh, Ceph CI performance CI stuff. So I'll add that. Did see that Kifu, I believe, enabled testing of classical OSD setups, and I believe that that's working in some fashion. Um, Josh,
Yeah, I think.
have you looked at that at all?
Yeah, I think he's enabled it, and it's running on every PR that's tagged either Crimson for the Crimson PRs or performance for the classical PRs. And I think the most
Good,
nice
good,
piece
good, good.
now is kind of a notification back from that job to give us the results in a GitHub comment. Because right now Kifu's just been kind of manually pasting them out of out of Jenkins.
Okay, okay. Is there like there's got to be some kind of mechanism in Jenkins. I've seen it done before where you can like trigger that, right?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure there is. I think we just need to make use of it.
Sure. Yeah, that would be really exciting. So, does anyone on this call know Jenkins well enough to know how that works?
I think it might be a good question for Kifu.
Sure. All right. Well, we can talk about it at the core stand-up or something then. Um,
Sure. I guess the other thing we talked about this week was the hardware. Neha, do you want to discuss that a little bit?
I guess before we wrap up the Jenkins topic, I think the next piece in my mind is also to look at the variability of results. So I haven't found the time to go and look at what that looks like for if we are trying to trigger master runs across PRs. How much variability are we seeing? That'll at least tell us how the hardware is behaving, and then maybe have more reasonable pass-fail criteria. I know we are trying to change the standard deviation and do some minor tweaks just to make those tests pass. But then I would like to see how much variability exists, at least for master PRs, like master baselines. So that part is something that I want to take a look maybe whenever I have time. But yeah, the next piece is about hardware, which I started a discussion with David Galloway. This is about doing long-running performance tests using the Topology CBT framework that we already have. The idea was to be able to label some nodes just for this purpose and trigger tests using the existing framework. Now, the first thing that came to mind was to repurpose some of the Smithy machines for this, if at all we have some extra. And I think David Galloway was also trying to figure out if the existing inserters that are being used for Jenkins-based testing can be repurposed for this purpose. So I guess that's where we are, and I think we had a small discussion in the core stand-up with Mark. I think, Mark, do you want us to say what you? We have like 4 inserters, right? That we're using at the moment.
Yeah, so we've got a total of 8 nodes. We've got 8 inserted nodes. One of them has an NVMe drive that's, I think, starting to fail. But that doesn't necessarily mean we can't make use of it still. My thought was that we would use 4 of them for, actually 6 of them in the long run for Jenkins, and then keep 2 of them available for basically doing like one-off tests on hardware that also has hard drives in it, because those are the inserted nodes are the only machines we have, kind of dedicated for performance that have hard drives. We could rearrange some of that. Depending on how much Jenkins is actually being used on the inserted nodes, we could maybe grab like 1 of them from Jenkins, grab the other 2 from the pool that are still being used by people for development, get those people moved over to Officinalis, and then we would maybe could scrounge up like 3 of them for Jenkins and 3 of them for Topology, but it's going to be really tight. And kind of the downside of this too is that right now with the 10 Officinalis nodes, that's a really nice chunk for doing kind of these bigger investigations, like for the IO 500 where they've got a 10 node challenge and that kind of thing. So just I've been kind of thinking about how to divvy this stuff up in a way that we would allow us to still make use of them for kind of those bigger jobs, but then not have them kind of end up contended on by a lot of stuff at the same time. If we got that piece in Toothology, the Google Summer of Code project, I think that would make things a lot better. I know we were talking about yesterday not kind of conflating the two, but if we had that so that we can make sure that bigger jobs in Toothology are not stalling out, I think that would make it a lot more palpable to just stick all of it in Toothology and then be able to kind of queue them up for different purposes.
I kind of disagree, because I think the whole point of labeling machines is that there's no contention. We know that there are going to be like n number of machines that we are only using for long-running performance tests. And
but what I'm saying is that then,
yeah.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, that's I was just like the Toothology project that we have. It's more for our regular development testing, where people are like multiple people are trying to add jobs to the queue and they are not finishing, or they're not finishing in time. But when we have these separate labels, it's not even going to be a person. We could just use cron jobs and stuff to run these long running tests, and if the labels are right, there's not going to be any contention.
Nihal, what I'm saying though is that with like the officinalis nodes, if we were able to still have them labeled in Teuthology as performance, but allow kind of one-off testing to also interrupt those kind of long-running tests, like to be able to go in and basically say, hey, I need to grab these for a while for some other kind of testing, then we might be able to actually just stick all of officinalis into Teuthology if we have that ability to be able to like do preemption and contend for those resources on an ad hoc basis. If that
I
makes
see
sense.
your point. Yeah, I see your point now.
I
Okay,
think we
yeah,
can kind of do that today, Mark, with the existing
yeah.
locking framework, right? Like if we need them for another purpose, we lock them into the Teuthology database just with the manual Teuthology lock command, and then say use them for Jenkins for a little while or for some manual tests.
Sure. You could do that. I'm just saying that other piece where then you don't have things waiting on things free up, right? Like you could basically like try to grab those resources and like, forcibly lock them for yourselves. But, if you had a job that you wanted to submit that used all 10 nodes, right now, if you just wanted to do that but let things finish, you couldn't really, right? Because something else with a smaller job will come in and steal the nodes before your job runs.
Right, but I guess I'm saying that you can use the manual locking to kind of avoid that problem if you're talking about trying to use some of these nodes or even a larger portion of them, just locking them one at a time as they become available. And even pausing the queue for automated jobs if you want to grab all of them.
Yeah. Sure.
We have the
we
mechanisms
do
that we can use to do that.
The other way to achieve what you're trying to say, Mark, is to follow a schedule. So if there is a schedule or a cron job schedule, which we know when we want to run these long running tests, we also know when they get over roughly. So whenever those resources are free, that is the time when you should be able to lock anything from that pool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, if you go in and time it right so that you're not trying to do it at the same time the existing jobs are running, then you could do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's unfortunate that we're kind of trying to replicate a lot of the same functionality that like kind of, real scheduling systems already have for this. Certainly if we can get some kind of, better prioritization of jobs or accumulation of priority in Teuthology, it'll make this a lot nicer, right?
Yeah, I think it's also worth considering what kind of hardware we need for different kinds of jobs. Like for longer running tests that are small scale, it makes sense to use Inserta. But if we want to do something larger scale, there simply aren't enough to do that. So we would need to go with a probably larger pool of smithies for that purpose.
Sure.
But maybe I guess the question would be, in terms of the hardware, like, does it make sense to get started today with some longer running tests with just a few inserters or a few smithies?
Yeah, I mean, right now, right, the easiest route to be able to do this is just to grab smithies. If we have a small pool of smithies that we can grab for the moment, that's probably the fastest answer. Simply because we still have people using Inserta for development. So if we can just grab some smithies for the next couple of weeks or month or something, that'd be probably the way to just immediately get this going.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to me. And then we could expand that pool later with the same kinds of machines in the same rack, so that we wouldn't be dealing with like disparate hardware.
Sure. my hope too is that we might be getting new nodes. Like that was kind of what I was earmarking and had maybe and I won't say unrealistic expectations, but with coronavirus, everything got kind of weird. But theoretically,
Yeah, I think everything's
there's a
going to be
chance
a
we
bit
might.
delayed now, so we'll probably
Yeah,
get new nodes in the future, but it might be a while.
yeah. We'll see. We'll see. It sounds like there's still a chance that we might get some this summer, but it's still kind of a little bit up in the air. So, um, yeah, I'd say Smithy for now.
Well, I think
Neha,
then we're on the
how many
same
do you
page.
need?
I mean, anything we can just start off with, like 3, 5, whatever. It depends on how much we have, right? I still need to
Yeah.
get that answer from David.
One thing, Neha, that you might see is that um, you might see performance degradation over time, depending on how long the node has been up for. I've seen situations where um, after rebooting a machine, our performance goes up, and it's almost certainly kernel related.
Yeah.
That might partially explain some of the variation that you've seen. Um, but there's so many different sources of it that could very well be other things, network or just about anything.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Go ahead, Josh.
Yeah, that's a good point with the long-running jobs. I think for those, at least we'll have more time to be able to do more of a kind of a burn-in period and hopefully eliminate some of that initial unusual high performance.
Yeah, what I'd like to see is consistent, at least repeatability in our results, at the least, and then we can think about long running and how long we do want to keep them going, or not even redeploy them, maybe, or do other fancy things. I don't know yet.
Yeah, I
think
agree.
you're
I think
going to
we need
have
to focus on
to.
trying to eliminate the variability as much as we can, so that we can make the results more useful for detecting regressions or improvements.
Yeah. To do that, you have to kind of try to do a lot of things that are irritating but helpful, right? Like reboot the nodes before you run the tests, redeploy the cluster before you run the tests. If you're going to age it, you age the test the exact same way every single time. So it's kind of about making everything as exactly similar as possible between two separate tests, except for the variable that you're changing.
Yeah, at least the redeployment part is handled pretty easily. Every time we lock these into methodology, it reimages them, the same image.
Yep. Yep. So that's good at least, right? So Neha, you might also want to start out with, instead of deploying an actual like big cluster or even small cluster, just do a single OSD and see how much variability you see in that case.
Yeah, I agree, and I think I did this exercise like a couple of years ago, and at that time it was random smithies that was getting picked, and also there was other variability with the operating system and other things. So I didn't really find a good baseline. So instead of just redoing the whole thing again and being disappointed, I just want to fix my matrix first, and I want to know which machine we are going to be using for this, and then try to do the baselining again. That makes more sense to me, I think.
Well, what if you even just grabbed one smithy to start out with, locked a single smithy, and then had your test run on it, multiple times?
Yeah, that can be done. I mean, yeah, there's nothing that stops us from doing that. Yeah. One node, even the tests don't need to be changed for that.
Yeah, exactly. Then you could just have it run that continuously, even, I don't know, for like a week.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Tautology already has a mechanism of you could just add a parameter where you can say that run this job 10 times. So, and Tautology would just collect 10 data points for you. So I think that's a good point, actually.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see. I see really weird behavior in this regard. Sometimes our performance is incredibly consistent, depending on the test I'm running. I can get very, very good consistent results. And then there are other situations where just wildly varying performance. And a lot of times it really depends on what you're testing, right? We have a lot of things in Ceph that are kind of have pseudo-random behavior, right? And can get into kind of a stable state, or can get into like this really horrible divergent state where you're seeing all kinds of churn and horribleness. So yeah, I suspect you'll see kind of a bimodal kind of behavior here.
Yeah. But yeah, let me do one thing. Let me just at least start off by doing some basic tests over and over again and see how that looks. I'll share the results with everyone.
Sure. Cool. Yeah, sounds good.
The other thing I was wondering is, I'm going back to the Jenkins topic again. I think currently we have a couple of workloads that are being run, if I'm not mistaken. But for a classic OST, I think we'd like to expand it a bit. Mark, do you have any thoughts on what those workloads should look like for, like, let us say, core PRs?
Sure. I mean, in terms of testing the OSD in a really fast, simplistic fashion, RBD with FIO really kind of is bang for your buck pretty good. It doesn't test everything by any means, but usually from what I've seen, the results are fairly consistent because RBD is pretty straightforward and simple. Not entirely, but it does a fairly good job of showcasing when we've made big mistakes in the OSD. Rados Bench too, maybe, but personally, I've kind of gravitated toward FIO for just kind of a very high level view of if we've screwed the OSD up. Certainly, we'd want like OMAP tests and more heavy RocksDB stuff too. But starting out, I'd say like just an FIO workload that does some big reads and writes, some small random reads and writes, probably a mixed workload, which I admit I end up testing less than I should, especially now looking at Majian Peng's latest results from his tests. So probably that would be a good kind of core test to just do big reads, big writes, sequential, and then like small random reads, small random writes, and a small random mixed workload. That would be a really good just basis, and then add on OMAP heavy tests, either RGW or Rados Bench if we want. CephFS workloads are actually really good for testing the MDS, but that's gets expands out here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I guess at the moment Jenkins just uses Rados Bench as its testing framework. So we could just start off with like adding some OMAP heavy workload profiles and like mixed reads and writes, and I think we have just read and write already. So I think that should be good enough. And we also don't want to increase the amount of time these tests take on per PR basis. But as far as the FIO stuff goes, I think that integration is already there in the tautology framework, so we can do that part using tautology. At least to start off with.
Yeah, I think we want that in Jenkins as well, because we can run fairly short FIO tests and still get really good data out of it. So on a per PR basis, I think we want that. But we could also do much more extensive FIO testing with tautology, like looking at like aging. This is going to be the big thing I think that we'll want tautology for in that case, because we won't want to pre-age anything for like Jenkins tests. We'll just want to deploy a cluster immediately, get some results out of it so that they finish fast.
Yeah. Yeah, that's maybe another discussion you can have with Kifu, how easy or difficult it would be to integrate FIO tests with Jenkins.
Yeah. Oh, that reminds me, Niha, is the Teuthology Jenkins FIO tests, are those still using the old librd FIO benchmark?
Yeah,
We should switch that over to the generic FIO one now, because that can use kernel RBD, CephFS, use CephFS.
you're talking about the client endpoint stuff that you added. It does include that also. I remember I added
Okay.
client endpoint support, but it doesn't do too many of those. It just has some basic testing. I'll just share with you what the existing workload profile looks like, and why don't you suggest what else we should add there?
Yeah, I mean, the big thing is just switching it over to using the FIO benchmark rather than the lib
Yeah.
RBD FIO one, because it's generic. We can very easily
Right.
use it for many different things.
Yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, we have both, but maybe makes sense to switch it.
Yeah,
It
honestly,
probably
at this
makes sense
point,
as
though,
well, like you're saying, Mark, to try to focus more on more realistic workloads, like with RBD FIO instead of Rados Bench. Like even for OMAP, I think Rados Bench is pretty unrealistic compared to how we actually use it in RGW and CephFS.
sure. I mean, it's just running it quick isn't the end of the world, right? I mean, it gives us some idea, but it's not great.
It is something. It's not quite. I mean, it's most similar to kind of a RGW workload without the bucket indexes if you're running it with data.
Yeah. And honestly, probably the default HS bench workload is going to be way better anyway, because it actually tests RGW and it gives you stuff like, how fast is bucket index listing under, various scenarios, which is kind of has been a big issue. So,
So I think, like to me, I guess it seems like our FIO, RBD, and HS bench would be kind of more minimal, realistic workloads rather than
I think
bench.
so. Yeah, I very much think so. And then we can decide on the CephFS side too what we want to do. The FIO benchmark can certainly be used with CephFS, and it will make you can create a parallel workload against it, but it won't stress the MDS very heavily, which is really what we want to test, I think. I mean, it's good to be able to look at FIO and CephFS and do comparisons between the two to see if there's like some weird regression in large sequential writes or something, or reads. I mean, we actually did see that, but for testing the MDS, we need something like MD test or maybe small file or something.
Yeah, certainly something more specialized.
So Niha, I think FIO is a good way to start on the Teuthology side if we can get that. Make sure it's using the normal FIO benchmark, and then I mean, like, just grab like one Teuthology node or one Sepia. What am I looking for? One of our fast-ish nodes, Smithy. There we go. One of the Smithy nodes, and just I mean, see how it does over time with multiple runs.
So I think this is where I think I added the generic FIO engine, but we still have the existing ones as well. So it's a matter of changing everything now.
Okay. Yeah, and so I mean, you could run this exact same test, but just switch out librd for kernel RBD or for RBD NBD, and you could do the exact same test with each of the different client endpoints and see variation across those as well.
Yeah.
There's when we combine all of the different permutations of all these different things that we can look at and cross compare, I think we'll very quickly find out that we can exceed our testing infrastructure.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, cool. Sounds good. I'm excited to hear what you find out.
Yeah, me too.
Greg, if you're here or listening, do you have any preferences regarding different tools for kind of stressing the MDS? I've kind of been using MD test just because that's what we always used to use in my HPC days. I know that there's small file from Ben England. Is there anything else you guys have been using?
I haven't really looked at any new benchmark options, and I don't think it's changed since we initially set stuff up in Toothology several years ago. So,
Are you
not
guys
really.
using MD test? I think I remember
think
seeing
it's
people
running
getting
in
Toothology
nightly,
for it.
but I haven't benchmarked. Yeah, I haven't done any benchmarking lately. I think it's one of the Toothology things that happens.
Okay.
Most of the
Okay.
benchmarking that's gone on is whatever Patrick did in Linode, and someone else picked that up and did a little bit with it, but I don't actually remember who. But
No
I think
worries.
he's talked to you about that. So nothing since then.
Okay. I think personally, unless anyone has strong opinions otherwise, I'll probably focus on MD test because it's widely used and fairly well respected as far as I know. The only downside with it is it requires MPI.
Yeah, no, that seems plausible. Beginning on with.
Cool. I think I will attempt to integrate that into CBT or possibly integrate the entire IO 500 benchmark into CBT so that we can just run the whole thing all kind of as one, benchmark. Okay, well, sounds good. Anything else, Neha or Josh, on CI stuff?
Don't think so.
All right. Well then, anything else generally, guys? Well, have a good week then. See you next week.
Thanks, you too.
You too. Thanks.